The New Orleans Saints are now in prime position to capitalize on the NFL's quarterback fallout. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media, covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, B.J. Hill and a couple of other free agent defensive tackles could be the New Orleans Saints remedy as they look to rebuild their defensive line in their new image. Derek Carr's contract is the last hurdle for the New Orleans Saints. We'll take a look at some options on how they can leap that hurdle. And we'll kick everything off with Las Vegas Raiders trading for Geno Smith. Might feel like it has no impact on the New Orleans Saints, but it truly puts the Saints in position to capitalize on the upcoming NFL quarterback fallout. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today, we're brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Head over to FanDuel.com for your chance at $150 in bonus bets. The New Orleans Saints, selecting at pick number 9 overall in this year's NFL draft, are in perfect position to capitalize on the upcoming NFL quarterback fallout following the Las Vegas Raiders trading for Geno Smith from the Seattle Seahawks. Let me give you 3 reasons or 3 ways that the Saints benefit from this. Number 1 is the most likely path, which is that quarterbacks begin to fly off the board now early on in the draft. Well, Ross, teams are handling their quarterback issues. How does this end up creating that? Well, there's a ripple effect here, right? The Raiders get Geno Smith. The Seattle Seahawks now are in need of a quarterback. Feels like that should be Sam Darnold, right? Clint Kubiak, Sam Darnold, they were connected over with the San Francisco 49ers. That makes a lot of sense. Sam Darnold goes there. Now, all of a sudden, you've got other teams like the New York Jets who pick at number 3, the New York Giants who pick at number 3, the New York Jets who have an open quarterback position picking at number 7. You got the Tennessee Titans, the Cleveland Browns, and there are still other teams too that are looking to figure out exactly who can be their next starting quarterback. Let's say that an option like Aaron Rodgers, which has been connected a lot to the New York Giants, ends up somewhere like Tennessee or ends up somewhere like the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't think that draft or signing Aaron Rodgers for a year precludes you from drafting a quarterback this season. So let's say that he does something and ends up with, let's say, the Pittsburgh Steelers or something like that. The New York Jets end up landing a guy like Russell Wilson in that case. Finally, Russell Wilson and Sierra get their New York lives together. And then, you could see the New York Giants going into this NFL draft behind the Tennessee Titans, behind the Cleveland Browns, potentially saying, you know what? I need a young quarterback. Really need an opportunity here. And so drafting a quarterback becomes an option for the New York Giants if they end up with an aging quarterback like a Russell Wilson or like an Aaron Rodgers and want to invest in the position. You even have the Las Vegas Raiders who pick at number 6 that could still draft a quarterback. I don't think that trading for Geno Smith precludes them from doing so, but they might wait until day 2 and do that with like a Will Howard or especially with the Chip Kelly connection there. There's also the possibility of like a Jalen Milroe or something like that. You get the idea. So this could mean that there would be 3 quarterbacks that go off the board in the first 8 selections before the New Orleans Saints end up picking at 9. That leaves them a potential playmaker at another position that they should be able to select. So you would imagine, let's say 3 quarterbacks go off the board. Let's just say that 3 go off the board early. Then you could see at least 1 offensive lineman, Travis Hunter, and then let's throw probably another offensive player out there that's 6 picks down, 3 picks. You've still got a lot of edge rushers that would still be on the board. Oh, Abdul Carter would be another one that would still go early as well. So you look at 7 picks there. Out of those 3 picks left, or 2 picks left ahead of you, there's still good opportunity for you to land, a Tyler Warren, a James Pierce Jr., a Mike Green, a Jahad Campbell, a Jalen Walker, a Will Campbell if he doesn't get picked early, a Teteroa McMillan out of Arizona, my number 1 prospect for the New Orleans Saints this offseason in terms of realistic selections at 9. There you go, right? So the quarterback fallout could lead to a bunch of veteran quarterbacks landing in places, but there's still teams like the Giants, teams like the Jets, and even still a team like the Las Vegas Raiders that could look to invest in that quarterback position and potentially end up leaping for a quarterback because they missed out on the market, overreacting to that, as we see teams do all the time when it comes to the quarterback position in the NFL draft. And that helps another one of those big-time playmaker, superstar types fall to you at pick number 9. Now, I didn't mention, Tyler Warren and some others too. Those guys we kind of already assume will be there at 9, but you never really know. So we'll see where things go for New Orleans. Here's the second way that the Saints end up potentially benefiting from this. The second way they end up benefiting from it is that a guy like Shedeur Sanders ends up falling all the way down to 9, right? And let's say that Tennessee takes Abdul Carter to start things off. Let's say that they also land an Aaron Rodgers, or they land, another veteran quarterback that they like a Zach Wilson or something like that. Cleveland takes Cam Ward. The New York Giants maybe land Aaron Rodgers and say, nope, no need for a quarterback. Or maybe they get a guy like Kirk Cousins who could potentially be on the move, something like that. Las Vegas feels like, we'll wait until day 2. And then the New York Giants land somebody in free agency like a Russell Wilson. They do the same thing. We'll wait until day 2. Then all of a sudden, if you're the New Orleans Saints at 9, you have 2 potential options. So this gives us 2 and 3. And this brings us back to yesterday's conversation. Number 1 being that you could draft Shedeur Sanders. Number 2 being that Mickey Loomis could say, all right, I'm going to do what I haven't done since 2007 and trade back and earn a quarterback tax off of this situation. And so it maximizes the potential for that to happen at number 9 on the board. And you think about teams that are behind the New Orleans Saints that could potentially be looking to invest in a quarterback. The Indianapolis Colts, they're reportedly shopping Anthony Richardson. If they end up making that move, there's an opportunity there. And a team that could potentially jump up. The Pittsburgh Steelers could potentially look to jump up. There's a lot of different ways that this could all play out. So for the New Orleans Saints, they could be in a position to where all of the aftermath, all of the fallout now, as the quarterback market begins to take shape around the NFL, puts them in position to be able to capitalize on all of this. There's also options 4 and 5, which is that the New Orleans Saints feel like, okay, well, everything that's going on across that quarterback market, let me go ahead and grab a quarterback at number 9, and they take a Jackson Dart at 9 if Shedeur Sanders is already off the board. Or there's always still, even though I think it's very unlikely, the potential that a team comes calling around about Derek Carr because they didn't land the quarterback that they wanted, the veteran quarterback that they wanted, and the New Orleans Saints could potentially pull off a trade in that situation, but the clock is ticking on that, and that seems very, very unlikely that will happen, although, as we know in the NFL, all things are possible. But for the New Orleans Saints, they're in a pretty good position here to benefit one way or another. And there's a lot of different ways to benefit, a lot of ways to capitalize off of what this quarterback market fallout across the NFL could look like, especially with them picking within the top 10. So either their options get maximized, they potentially look at leveraging options against other teams, a la a trade, or they potentially end up being able to say, well, we're in a position here where we could snag somebody that we didn't think that we could snag. Go ahead and do it. Absolutely a way that the New Orleans Saints could go. So lots of benefit here for New Orleans. Coming up next, one of the big things the New Orleans Saints need to get figured out in the coming days, or honestly may have already figured out, is how they're going to handle Derek Carr's contract. Let's break down some of the options as we continue on next with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, where you can go to make every moment more. The NCAA basketball season is, of course, heating up with the tournament right around the corner. So much to dive in on over at FanDuel today. And if you're a new customer, it's even better. You get $150 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. It's over at FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com for your chance at $150 in bonus bets. And don't worry, even if you miss something like a heavy point spread, you can also get in on things like live betting for a fourth quarter comeback or player scoring, anything like that. Later on today, you got a big basketball hoops matchup, probably not as big as it used to be back in the day, but the Duke Blue Devils are taking on the North Carolina Tar Heels, 9.5-point favorites are the Duke Blue Devils in that one. So heavy favorite with that first $5 bet on if you are a new customer. So make every moment more over at FanDuel today, the official sports betting partners of the NBA. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints are days away from free agency, and the last big hurdle for them to clear comes down to quarterback Derek Carr. Not necessarily his future in New Orleans. We know that the New Orleans Saints feel that they're perfectly comfortable rolling ahead with Derek Carr as a starter in 2025. So now the conversation simply becomes about his contract, a $51+ million contract right now in terms of his cap hit in 2025. The New Orleans Saints are just under $40 million over the salary cap limit right now in the NFL. And so what are they going to do with Derek Carr's contract to help them get under that limit, compliant with the cap, and even better than that, operating in the black, where they get the chance to actually be able to go out there and add free agents this offseason? So we know the New Orleans Saints want to be more active. We know that they feel perfectly comfortable rolling ahead with Derek Carr. So now how do they marry those two things? So they got a couple options, right? The first and easiest option is the restructure that we've been talking about since the regular season. And look, these contracts are built specifically ahead of time with a restructure plan already attached. And in fact, it's already built into players' contracts that once they sign their contract, they agree to restructures. That way the team doesn't have to go to that player's representation. You don't really ever go to the player, but to that player's agent, that player's representation, and say, hey, we'd like to restructure the contract. When you sign a New Orleans Saints contract, you agree that they can restructure your contract anytime that they want, because it doesn't take money away from you. It doesn't change anything about you. It doesn't really give you like this big payment up front. They still pay it out over the course of regular game checks. All that it does is guarantee you money. Oh, boo-hoo, right? There's not a lot of players that are going to say no to that. So for the New Orleans Saints, it's really all about accounting. And so they could just restructure his contract, a full restructure that includes reducing his $30 million base salary down to vet minimum and taking his $10 million roster bonus and converting that to a signing bonus as well. Sorry, I think I said reducing his base. It does reduce his base salary all the way down to vet minimum, but what it does is that it takes that reduction amount and turns it into a signing bonus. So he doesn't lose that money. It just gets paid out in a different way that allows the New Orleans Saints to be able to average it out over the course of a number of years. So with that, it would save, if the Saints simply did a full restructure of both of those amounts, it would save the Saints 30.9, so effectively $31 million in 2025. And that would put them basically like $7 or $8 million above the salary cap still, but then a restructure to Cesar Ruiz and then a restructure to, let's just say, Carl Granderson basically gets them compliant with the salary cap. Then you got to make other moves, pay cuts to Cam Jordan, pay cuts to Taysom Hill, potentially, depending upon his health and when he'll be available, all this other stuff. You could restructure some other contracts as well. You can cut some players. All of that stuff gets you to the point where you're spending money or making money to spend as opposed to still being compliant. Now, bear in mind that this amount will change and fluctuate. If they were to re-sign Chase Young, you can get some hidden money out of that because there's $9 million of dead cap that you can effectively flip and spread out. So you could actually save money by re-signing Chase Young. There's a couple of guys on the roster like that. Chase Young, I think Juwan Johnson's like that as well. And so, that's going to end up impacting some of those numbers too. You could also re-sign Paulson Adebo. If you do that, you lose some money in 2025, but you get a player back. So it's not the same as going out in free agency and shopping for a new face, but it is still about acquiring or retaining talent that you would otherwise lose. So it's certainly a plus situation in that, in terms of spending money and getting something back. So that's the easiest route to go. And I think there's a valid question out there, which is, well, if that's the easiest route to go, and Derek Carr doesn't have to agree to that, and the Saints can do that, why haven't they done it already? Well, the truth is they may have. The truth is that the transaction just might not yet have processed, and therefore it hasn't become public knowledge that that move is done. The other scenario, which I think both things can be true at the same time. And so the other scenario is, and I'll explain that in a second, but the other scenario is that the Saints have decided to leave no stone unturned and still go to Derek Carr and look at the potential for a reduction in salary, look at the potential of a pay cut. Now, as I've said before on this show, the New Orleans Saints agreed to that contract back in 2023 when they signed him. They're the ones that gave him a no trade clause. They're the ones that ended up signing him and giving him a bunch of money and giving him roster bonuses and dates where things guarantee, like in the third day of the league year, the $30 million base salary guarantees, for instance. He's already got a $10 million roster bonus that's already been guaranteed since the fifth day of last year's contract. In fact, the fifth day of this year's contract, another $10 million for 2026 guarantees. They're the ones that did that. Derek Carr owes them nothing, right? They agreed to that deal. And so for Derek Carr, who has already publicly said yeah, I'm not really into taking a pay cut. I wouldn't do that. I'd restructure, which again, he doesn't have any say in whether or not his contract gets restructured. That's a done deal if they want to do that. But he doesn't really owe them anything. They agreed to give him that contract. If they don't like that contract, then they shouldn't have given him that contract in the first place. Like, that would be the mentality of anybody that's on the opposite side of negotiating that pay cut from the New Orleans Saints, right? Hey, you agreed to this. You chose this. And so for New Orleans, like, they could certainly go that route still. Doesn't mean they have to be deterred just because he has said out loud, oh, I don't want to take a pay cut. It's not like they're going to see that, read that, and go, oh, well, he already said he wasn't going to do it, so we're not going to. Like, yeah, you go and have that conversation. It's a new coaching staff. There's all this other stuff that's new, that's changed, everything. Like, yeah, you certainly have that conversation. But I don't necessarily know that that's actually going to amount to a pay cut being done. You could rework contracts in other ways. You could look at how you make for both you and Derek Carr a cleaner separation in 2026. You can look at removing certain things then, as opposed to adjusting certain things here in 2025. There's a lot of ways to kind of go about all of it. So what you can, and the reason why I said that I think both things can be true, is that it could be that the Saints did have that conversation, and also that conversation didn't lead to a pay cut, and also the New Orleans Saints did restructure the contract, and we haven't learned it yet because it hasn't processed, right? Like, all of those things could actually have happened. The good news for the Saints is that they don't really have to be under the salary cap until that 3 p.m. Central Time, 4 p.m. New York time, as they like to say in the NFL. Let's call it what it is, 4 p.m. Eastern time. I don't know why they're so specific about that. Wednesday deadline of March 12th. That doesn't mean that they can't get involved during the negotiation period of March 10th and 11th, though, because those contracts are not official. Those contracts are not ones that people are agreeing on and signing and becoming official. Those are contracts that are being agreed upon in principle in conversation between the player's agent, right? Player's representation and the teams. There's no contact between teams and players at that point. That's why you're seeing a lot of veterans get released early, because they're allowing those veterans to go out there and start actually having contact, because they become what are called like street free agents. They're immediately available. They're not waiting for their contracts to expire as the new league year ticks over in March, on Wednesday. And so they get the opportunity to go out there and visit with teams. But those other people that are still waiting, the vast majority of people that are still waiting for their contracts to either void or be terminated or expire, they have to wait until that actually happens. And so New Orleans can get involved in the negotiation period early on because those contracts are not official. So you could still hear that the Saints have agreed in principle, or a team or a player has agreed in principle with the New Orleans Saints on this deal, but it's not official until Wednesday. So Saints don't really have to be under the salary cap until that Wednesday deadline. So we'll see when things process. We'll see when things become kind of public. But what we do know is that Derek Carr's contract is the last major hurdle for New Orleans and allows them to be more active in free agency, like they have expressed they desire to be. Coming up next, New Orleans Saints, speaking of how they could spend those free agent or those $20-25 dues, one way they could do that is by building up their defensive line. And a guy like BJ Hill in free agency could be the perfect addition for New Orleans. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints are going to be looking to address their defensive line and really the trenches as a whole. We covered offensive line here recently, but take a look at the New Orleans Saints options at defensive line in free agency. I think there's some good options for New Orleans that we haven't discussed yet. So I wanted to bring some new names into the conversation, leading off with Cincinnati Bengals defensive tackle BJ Hill. As a quick refresher, a couple of the names that we have already mentioned out there include guys that are kind of like pie in the sky, like Milton Williams from the Philadelphia Eagles, but more realistic options, including Tier Tart, the former Los Angeles Chargers defensive tackle. That's that 0 to 1 technique kind of nose tackle that could probably be had on a 1-year cheap deal. Sebastian Joseph Day is another one, formerly of the Tennessee Titans, but more importantly has spent time with Brandon Staley in multiple locations, both of the Los Angeles teams. So he could be somebody on a 1-year deal that makes a lot of sense as well. So those are a couple of guys that we've highlighted, but I wanted to bring 3 new names to the table, one of which I will tell you right now, you're going to hate, but it's not this one. BJ Hill's where I want to start. BJ Hill of the Cincinnati Bengals is a player that, because of all of the other things going on in Cincinnati, Jamar Chase contract, T. Higgins contract, Trey Hendrickson potential trade that could lead to a new contract in Cincinnati, all these other things, it might be that BJ Hill's one of those guys that ends up on the outside because of all of the other stuff that's going on. And New Orleans would be major benefactors from that. BJ Hill, right now listed at 6'3", 311 pounds, is a versatile threat that could end up being utilized across your entire defensive line on the interior, whether it's at 3 tech, 1 tech, 0 tech, 2I, wherever. He's got the versatility. Played 15 games last season with Cincinnati, 17 the season before that, 16 the season before that. And before that was appearing in games, but wasn't starting in those games. So you would see seasons with the New York Giants where he was playing 16 games, but only started 5, where he appeared in 16 games in 2020, but didn't start in a single game. So he doesn't have the snap count tread on the tires, even though he's appeared in 112 games in his 7-year career already. So something to keep in mind, and has never played and appeared in less than 15 games in a season. Last year, he had 3 sacks. The year before that, he had 4.5. The year before that, he had 3. The year before that, he had 5.5. So he's continued to just kind of, produce in that area, but 7 tackles for a loss last season and a total of 56 tackles, which was the second most in his career, I think is the big place where I end up really focusing in on where a guy like BJ Hill could have an impact. And it's his ability to help the New Orleans Saints run game. That's where they ranked 31st last year. I think that you saw, BJ Hill be one of those rare players that signs a 3-year contract and plays all 3 years of that contract. That goes to show you just how much he was a benefit to the Cincinnati Bengals in all 3 of those seasons. So he is absolutely somebody that I would watch out for. Will probably be 30, I think, by the time the season begins. PFF has a projected contract for him of 2 years, $10.25 million. So you're looking at a situation there to where you're looking at per year. So that's a pretty hefty contract. But if you're able to do that and structure it in such a way where it's $20 million guaranteed, $20 million in total, but 12 million of it is guaranteed and a signing bonus or something like that, then you can kind of spread some of this stuff out over the course of 5 years and, kind of keep the costs low, backload the base salary in 2026 so that you could potentially go back to the table and negotiate beyond 2026 if at 32 years old, he's somebody that you still want to keep around. So a good option there for New Orleans and one that I really like as well. Let's go from BJ Hill to DJ Jones. I mean, you want a 0-1 tech that's going to end up having a big impact on your run game, an 11.3% run stop percentage last season for DJ Jones. He would be an excellent addition for the New Orleans Saints defense coming over from the Denver Broncos in this case. You see his projected contract from Pro Football Focus being 2 years, $9 million. So a little bit cheaper of a contract than BJ Hill, but still somebody that you're going to spend some money on. And that's okay, right? Like if there's 2 places where I could seriously see the New Orleans Saints spending good money, because that's not massive dollars, right? Like that's not huge. We're talking about Osa Odigizua potentially pushing $20 million per year at the position. Milton Williams potentially pushing $20 million a year at the position. We're talking about less than that for 2 years in total, right? So not that big. But if there's a place where the Saints are going to spend some decent money like the DJ Jones or the BJ Hill contracts would be, defensive tackle is one of those spots. Left guard is one of those spots, right? Offensive line, defensive line. People keep talking about building up the trenches. No, you can't spend pick 9 on a skill position. You got to build up the trenches. Well, there's 7 rounds in the NFL draft and there's an entire free agency period. So go build your trenches there while also acquiring top end talent at impact positions. And I think that a guy like DJ Jones is an example of all of that wrapped into one nice little package. He had 3 hits on the quarterback last year, only 1 tackle for a loss, but again, that 11.3% run stop rate and his ability to contribute as a nose tackle specifically, I think is what you're looking at. 1 sack last season, 42 total tackles, I think is the big thing that you're looking at there. The concern with him comes down to missed tackles. He has seen his missed tackles kind of come up a little bit over the course of the past few years, but not something that I'm super concerned about right away. 6 foot, 300 pounds, 305 pounds. He's the type of guy that absolutely has a chance to be a good impact player for New Orleans on the interior. 3 missed tackles last season, 6.7%. It's higher than you'd like it to be, but is it career ending? No. Is it game changing? Probably not. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. 3 batted passes at the line as well. So I like a lot what you can get with a guy like DJ Jones. Definitely a name to keep an eye out on as kind of one of those already proven nose tackles. Even though he's a little bit undersized for the position, that is where he ends up having a pretty good opportunity to have an impact for your team. All right, let's get to the one that I think you're going to hate. But if your focus in 2025 is upgrading your run defense, and signing one player can have the impact that you're looking for, but raises probably your average age on defense, is it worth making that signing? According to Pro Football Focus, it is. They actually ended up mocking this player to New Orleans in an offseason piece where they were talking about the Saints looking at adding a player that can, that fits an immediate need. And that player is now former Miami Dolphins defensive tackle Calais Campbell. Now, Calais Campbell is going to be 39 years old very soon. He's 38 now. That probably isn't the greatest situation for New Orleans. But look, it was a 1-year, $2 million deal that the Dolphins signed him to last year, and it helped them out tremendously having a player that still plays at such a high level as a Calais Campbell. The Saints could potentially sign a similar deal. The guy is going to be 39. Just played his 37-year-old season 2 years ago in Atlanta, 17 games. Started all 17 of those games. Played 17 games last year at 38 years old in Miami. 5 sacks last year, 6.5 sacks the year before that. 12 tackles for a loss last year, 17 tackles for a loss the year before that. Not bad. Not bad is all that I'll say. And so, yeah, Calais Campbell makes your team a little bit older. Yeah, Calais Campbell doesn't help you make your team younger, but Calais Campbell definitely makes your team a better run-stop team and is somebody that could contribute. So it just depends. What's more important to the New Orleans Saints? The fact that he's pushing 40 or the fact that he can help them out where they need help in the trenches, at least just on a 1-year deal. Did a 1-year deal in Atlanta, 1-year deal in Miami, do a 1-year deal in New Orleans, and you're moving on. I think that there's better options because I understand the age concern, but if New Orleans feels that he can help more than he hurts on a 1-year, $2 million deal, a 1-year, $3 million deal, yeah, at least bring him in. He doesn't have to be the only defensive tackle that you bring in. In fact, he shouldn't be, but certainly could be somebody that helps and gives you a big-time leader, another big-time leader in your locker room. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode as we continue getting back to 7 days a week here, I want to take a look for the New Orleans Saints at their running back position and highlight some of the really incredible running backs in next year's draft class. We'll have that coming up for you in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much. As always, make it as your first listen. Go and check out Locked On NFL Draft for your second listen today. And we thank you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.